Now that we've learned a lot about the integer type, I thought it would be quite useful to actually start to do a little bit of maths with it. Now I know what you're thinking, maths doesn't seem particularly fun, but that's kind of what builds the basis of programs, and all your programs are based on maths, and it can be quite interesting when you're doing it with programming. So let's get into it. So the first thing we need to know is what an operator is. Now, we don't need to know too much about it, but essentially, if we were to, let's get rid of all this, and we're going to have, for example, we're going to have 8 plus 4. Now, we can just type that. Obviously, we're not actually assigning that to anything, but 8 plus 4 is, so the plus is an operator here, and it's an arithmetic operator, so it basically can do maths, basically. Now, this means that you can make all sorts of things, like a calculator, or basically any program you want using maths. But, so 8 plus 4, what does this actually do? Well, obviously, it just adds them together, but what it does is it takes 8, and then it thinks 8 plus 4, so it adds on 12, and obviously that's quite obvious, but what if we had int number 1 equals 4? I don't know if I've talked about initializing variables when you declare them, but that's how you do it. You can just type that, and then number 1 equals 4, and int number 2 equals 3. If we did number 1 plus number 1 plus number 2, yeah, obviously that's going to give us 7. But number 1 is still 4. You see, we don't actually change the value of number 1. We just take this, so we get number 1 add number 2, which is 7, and then it does whatever it likes with that. So, for example, let's say I was to print number 1 plus number 2 to the screen. Well, let's just get rid of this up here. In fact, and compile that and run it. As you can see, we get 7 printed to the screen. Now, let me just make that a little bit nicer. Oops. There we are, 7. We've got 7 printed to the screen. Now that's quite obvious, but now, what if I told you? Well, what do you think that... So we've just run this command, number 1 plus number 2. What do you think number 1 is now? Now, it could either be 4 or it could be 7. What do you think it could be? Well, it's 4. In fact, let me format that a little nicer. It's still 4, because we didn't actually change number 1. So, you see, you need to know that number 1 plus number 2, whenever you're using an arithmetic operator, it does not change either of these values. It just basically creates a new value. So number 1 is still 4 after we've done this, and number 3 is still 3. Number 2, sorry, is still 3. I can't get my numbers right today. Yes, so basically, that's how it works. But obviously, number 1 plus number 2 is 7, but it doesn't, you just need to remember that it doesn't change either of the variables unless you assign it, which we'll get onto another time. So, basically, we can do any form of maths. Obviously, we can do take away if you'd like. So, let me just get rid of that. Also, you can comment out what's happening there? You can comment out lines of code if you don't need them anymore. So to do that, just put / before the code. I've talked about that in the comments video. But so obviously, 4 take away 3 is 1. So that's just to show that you can do it. Now, you can't really do a divide in this. I can use that on my computer, but that's because my thing sorry, there's a plane going over my head. I can do that by pressing Alt and /, but most people probably won't have that on their keyboard, and C doesn't really support that because it's a Unicode character, and mostly you use ASCII when you're programming. So to divide, you can type /. Now we're going to get into this on integers, in our integers versus floats video, which will come a bit later. But basically, what this does is it will round the number down to the so it will chop off the decimal point. So if I was to do this, it would still say 1, because 4 divided by 3, is 1 1/3, or I don't like mixed numbers, but that makes more sense in that case. 1.3 recurring, and obviously we can't have 1.3 recurring because integers store whole numbers, so it just thinks, oh, chop off the end bit and let's just make it 1. But now this is where it gets a little bit confusing. 5 divided by 3, even though it would be 1.6 recurring, which in a maths class you would say, well, that will round that up to 2. You don't actually round up when you're using decimals. It just chops off the decimal point value. So as you can see, even 5 divided by 3 is considered 1 in integers. Now, what about times? Let's go back to our old 4 times 3. So I'm expecting this to do 12, but what if we were to do number 1 x number 2? No? What about this? Well, obviously not, because you can't you can't multiply. I'm trying to find out. Well, no, I've gone. I'm trying to find out where the multiplication symbol is on this keyboard, but I don't think it even has one. So you need to use the star or the asterisk, or whatever you want to call it. Now, the reason this is just the same as the division, sorry. You can't most keyboards don't have a time symbol. And also, if you were to use the number x, well, number 1 x number 2, that would just be considered one variable. As it says, it's an identifier. It thinks it's a variable, and it doesn't really know because it's not defined. But number 1 times number 2 is done by the asterisk or the star. And when you run this, you can see that, if it ever loads, it will type 12. It will write 12 to the screen, and because obviously 4 times 3 is 12.